The story is over. Popy hopes you enjoy this story. The story begins now. My father Zhao Yong'an said before he went to the army that if he died outside, he allowed my mother to remarry the hunter in the village. However, although that hunter was lame in one leg, he was the most fierce. He could even kill a tiger with one punch. It was said that he had also killed his ex-wife. My mother would be going to her death if she married him. 3 years later, news of my father's death indeed came. My grandmother and the elders of the clan received 20 taels of silver from the hunter, and forced my mother to marry him. On the day the news of my father's death came, my mother was washing clothes by the river. It was the cold winter, and the water in the river was floating with ice chips. Bitterly cold. My grandmother forbade her from using hot water, saying that firewood was precious and not something a worthless slut like her, who couldn't give birth to a son, could use. I tried to pick up more firewood in the mountains, but when I brought it back, it was all used by my second uncle for his brazier. Even if my mother and I used one more stick of firewood, we would be beaten severely by my grandmother and scolded for 3 days and nights. I wanted to help, but my mother chased me away. It's cold by the river. Nan Nan, go over there to play. It can get some sunshine and be warmer over there. Both of us wore thin clothes, and in the winter, only by basking in the sun at noon could we feel a little warmer. After finishing washing the clothes, we returned home, and my grandmother and the elders were already waiting impatiently. They were anxious, but they didn't go to the river to look for my mother, saying that they wanted her to finish washing today's clothes. Washing so slowly. I don't know where she has been wandering again. What a worthless slut. Since Yong'an is gone, her heart doesn't know where it has gone either. She scolded as usual, throwing a bundle at us. The official sent the news that Yong'an was killed by you. Ever since marrying you, my son has had no good luck. Now that Yong'an is gone, you should also get married quickly and don't stay in our old Zhao family to bring disaster. The bundle was very small, containing only 2 worn-out clothes of my mother's. My grandmother was so eager that she didn't seem to be sad about my father's death at all. Those who didn't know might think that the dead one was just an old dog in the village. My mother didn't say much, just tightly held my hand. Can I take Dandan away with me? My mother wasn't very sad either, only worried about me. My grandmother glared and said, let's see if that hunter is willing to give silver. Such a big girl, if sold to a human trafficker, could also be exchanged for 10 taels of silver. My mother held my hand even tighter. We both knew that once my mother left, my grandmother would sell me and would never raise me for one more day. My mother carried the bundle and tightly held my hand as we were driven to Zhang the hunter's house by my grandmother and the elders. He was sharpening his knife at home, making continuous clang-clang sounds. His broken leg couldn't bend and could only stick to one side, making his posture look very strange. He had a scar on his face, stretching from the bottom of his left eye to the top of his right mouth corner, as if dividing his face into 2 halves, making him look even more fierce. I hid behind my mother. The hunter looked at us and said, forcibly selling this woman to me for 20 taels of silver is already too much. Don't expect anything else. He seemed not willing to marry my mother, let alone take me. This burden. Along. My grandmother shouted. My family's Yong'an saved your life back then. Now that he is gone, handing over this slut to you is for your gratitude. This worthless slut is now relying on you and wants to bring this dead girl to be your daughter. You are lucky to have a wife and a daughter all of a sudden. I am not worth so much silver at all. Many families earn only 2 or 3 taels of silver a year. 10 taels of silver can buy 1 mu of good land, which is a lot of money. The hunter looked at him again and said nothing. The villagers all said that he was taciturn, but his stare could scare people to death. My grandmother pushed my mother, who had a thin body, and she almost fell. My mother pulled me forward 2 steps and directly knelt down. Brother Zhang, my nan eats little but can work. Can you please give us a way to live? The hunter looked over, frowned at me, and his eyes were inexplicable. My mother pulled me and said, "Call him." I looked at the hunter and the fierce scar on his face, trembling, and said, "Dad." The hunter was stunned, and the scar looked even more ferocious. My grandmother kicked my back. "Your father just died, and you are already in a hurry to call someone else dad. You little slut. Just like your slutty mother. Your hearts have long been towards outsiders." She kicked me one after another, and I lay on the ground, not daring to resist or even shout. It had always been like this since I was a child. As long as I let her hit me to her heart's content, she would stop. My mother crawled over to save me but was kicked away by my grandmother. In the Zhao family, it had always been like this. My mother couldn't save me, nor could she save herself. "Stop!" The hunter stood up, went into the house, and threw out 10 taels of silver. "This girl is my family's child from now on." I looked up at the hunter. My mother didn't notice his words, but I heard them. My grandmother took the silver and was about to leave, but the hunter stopped her, demanding to write a contract. My grandmother refused, saying she didn't want to write any contract. But the hunter snatched the silver back. "If you don't sign, give the silver back." In the end, with the witness of the elders and the village head, a contract was written, and my mother and I became the people of Zhang the hunter's family. My mother dropped the bundle and started working. She hoped that by being diligent and doing more work, the hunter would see her hard work and allow me to have more food and not beat me. This household was simply furnished, with 3 main rooms, a central living room, and 2 bedrooms on each side. But only 1 bedroom had a bed, and the other was empty. My mother took me to see the firewood room. The firewood was neatly arranged, and the room was also clean. My mother tidied up the firewood and built a bed for me with wooden boards. "Nan, don't be afraid. This is where I will sleep at night." I spread the straw on the bed. "Mother, I'm not afraid. Anyway, it has always been like this in the Zhao family. When father was at home, he disliked me for hindering his mother from giving birth to a little brother and always drove me to the firewood room. The firewood room in the Zhao family was much dirtier than this, with rats and snakes. In winter, it was bitterly cold, and in summer, it was as hot as a steamer. I have survived all these years." My mother hugged me. "Maybe it will be better after I give him a son." But I vaguely felt that maybe father was not nice to mother, not because she didn't give birth to a son. "Mother, why did father want you to remarry to the Zhang family? Before, father watched you closely, not allowing you to leave the village or look up at people. Grandma always scolded you, telling you to stop flirting outside. How could he suddenly want you to remarry so eagerly and even want to take your life?" My mother's bitter smile was suppressed in her chest, and her voice was very low, because only Zhang the hunter could afford so much silver. The rest of the words she didn't say. But I knew that father wanted mother to come to her death. It turned out that before he left, father had already thought about selling mother for money. He couldn't come back. But he also didn't want mother to have a good life. He sold mother for money and even cut off her way out. I guessed this not because I was smart, But because they were too obvious, even if I didn't hear it, the villagers would talk about it, and I couldn't help but know. Soon, Zhang the hunter came back. He didn't talk to us and just carried a lot of wooden boards into the room. There was a lot of banging and knocking. He hit hard, and with each blow, it seemed like it was hitting our hearts. My mother stood outside the room several times, wanting to ask where the food was for dinner, but she didn't dare. After a while, Zhang the hunter came out. Seeing us standing there, he frowned. "What's the matter?" His voice was fierce, and I was so scared that I wanted to shrink back. But here, there were only my mother and me. If I shrank back, my mother would be alone. I stood firm and held my mother's hand. Standing with him, the hunter saw my action, and his eyebrows moved. My mother hesitated and asked, "I want to ask about making dinner. Can you take out the food for dinner? You've been tired all day and should eat." The hunter frowned again, looked at us up and down suspiciously, and pointed to the kitchen. "There." My mother looked and said, "The key." The hunter frowned even deeper and went over to kick open the door. "There is no lock. Where is the key?" But it wasn't like this in the Zhao family. The kitchen in the Zhao family was locked. And even the food, oil, salt, eggs at home were locked in the cabinet. The meals at home were all cooked by my mother. But how much rice, flour, oil, salt, and firewood she used were all decided by my grandmother. She would take out the rice, flour, oil, and salt needed for this meal and put them on the stove. Watching my mother cook, even if a grain of rice was dropped, she would scold for half a day. She said my mother was a worthless slut and that we were starving ghosts reborn who only knew how to eat and didn't know how to work. She was afraid that we would steal food. My mother took me into the kitchen and saw the rice, flour, oil, and salt all placed there. Hesitating, she looked at Zhang the hunter, and he went out again. My mother was a little afraid to move. She was afraid that if she didn't do well, Zhang the hunter would beat her when he came back. Just like my grandmother, she was also afraid of being suspected of stealing food. In the end, my mother still made the meal. When the meal was on the table, my mother and I stood in the yard and didn't dare to move. Zhang the hunter carried 2 large baskets back and entered the unoccupied west room. Seeing the food on the table, he looked at my mother and me again. Frowning even deeper, he washed his hands and sat down. Seeing that we were still standing, he gruffly told us to sit. He served a small portion of rice and said, "Make more tomorrow if there is not enough today." He ate quickly, huffing and puffing, and finished eating less than half of it. After eating, he sat there, sharpening his firewood knife while watching us eat. I soon discovered the problem. When I ate fast, he wouldn't look at me. When I ate slowly and wanted to put down my chopsticks, he would frown. This meant he wanted me to eat. My mother and I ate the rest of the food tremblingly, waiting to be scolded and beaten. However, Zhang the hunter didn't scold or beat us. He just put away the firewood knife and told my mother to boil hot water for us to wash and sleep. "You've been busy all day." My mother quickly boiled hot water. After Zhang the hunter washed, she thought about it and also washed her face and hands and feet. After all, it was the first day, and she wanted to be clean so that he wouldn't dislike her. She muttered while washing. Her expression was gloomy and nervous. I used the remaining hot water to wash, and I felt my hands and feet warm up. It turned out that washing my face and feet with hot water was so comfortable. No wonder my second uncle and grandmother always ordered me to boil more hot water in winter. After taking a bath, I entered the firewood room. My mother told me to cover my ears and pretend not to hear anything, no matter what I heard. Know that? I nodded firmly. I know. Before, when my father was drunk and came back from outside after being away for half a year, he also entered the firewood room and beat me up, saying that it was all my fault for being a worthless girl who made him have no son and be laughed at, and that it was my fault for making him lose money. That time, I almost died. It was my mother who picked up a firewood knife and threatened to fight him to save me. Zhang the hunter was even stronger. Could he kick me to death with 3 kicks? However, he wasn't drunk or angry. He just came over like picking up a little chick, picked me up, and entered the west room. My mother was carefully standing in the room. Originally, the empty room now had a large wooden bed, and on the bed were several quilts. Although they were a bit old but clean, there were also 2 sets of old cotton-padded jackets and pants on the quilt. The hunter put me down, turned around, and went back to his east room. The door closed, and soon there came the sound of his snoring. My mother and I looked at each other, and this night we slept very uneasily, but also very warmly. I curled up in my own quilt and whispered, "Mother, it's so warm. I have never been so warm in winter. And my stomach is also warm after eating at night. I feel like I am really alive now." My mother touched my head. "Nan Nan, you called him dad today. Call him that in the future. And always call him that." I nodded. Yes. Zhang the hunter is much better to me than my own father. Later, my mother gradually increased the amount of food she cooked. She didn't dare to make too much at once but increased it little by little. After several days, she finally figured out Zhang the hunter's temper and appetite. He ate a lot, as much as the combined appetite of my mother and me. But he never stopped us from eating. When we ate less, he would frown instead. He would go hunting in the mountains. When he caught big game, he would sell it. Occasionally, he would keep small chickens and rabbits for my mother to stew. He only ate half, and the remaining half was left for my mother and me. I had only eaten meat 3 times in my life, and this was the 4th time. Meat was really delicious. No wonder my grandmother and second uncle liked it so much. My mother saw me eating happily and left some more for me. I was only focused on eating and didn't notice. That night, I ate too much and had a stomachache in the middle of the night. I rolled around in bed in pain. My mother rubbed my stomach, but it didn't work. She ran out to dig up some bottom ash from the stove to make me drink it. But I vomited it all out after taking a sip. The stomachache was like I was going to die. Zhang the hunter rushed into the room and saw me like this. He directly wrapped me in a quilt and carried me on his shoulder to run. My mother stumbled after us, not daring to say a word. He carried me to the village doctor's house and kicked the door open. The doctor's family was frightened by him. They complained. But when they saw his face, they dared not say anything. The doctor felt my pulse and asked what I had eaten these days. Overeating and indigestion. Judy usually eats poorly, and suddenly eating so much meat. Her digestion is not good. It's okay. I'll prescribe some medicine. Vomit it out and warm her stomach with hot water. Eat something light these days, and she'll be fine in a few days. He poured some unknown thing into my mouth, and I vomited it all out. The room was filled with a terrible smell. The doctor's wife muttered, "This is just because she has never eaten good food. She doesn't have the blessing to enjoy it." Zhang the hunter looked up at her fiercely, scaring her back into the room. I also felt embarrassed. eating too much meat and getting sick. Just as my grandmother said, I was a starving ghost reborn with no future. Zhang the hunter carried me back. On the way, he asked gloomily, "Have you never eaten meat before?" I thought he was questioning me and said in a low voice, "This is the 4th time. I only ate 1 or 2 pieces before. And at home, my mother and I would never get even the soup. I really had never eaten good food before." He grunted and said, "Eat more in the future, and you'll be fine." I was tightly wrapped in the quilt and heard him clearly. After I got sick, I could only eat porridge for a few days. Zhang the hunter brought back millet and brown sugar. Millet and brown sugar were precious things. Only women who had just given birth could drink a bowl or 2 of it with some brown sugar after production. I had a bowl of millet porridge with brown sugar every meal, and I felt very nourished. I ate better than my mother did when she was giving birth. Zhang the hunter watched me eat every day. When he saw my complexion getting better, his face finally looked better. He went to repair the doctor's door and also dragged the doctor to feel my pulse again. After the doctor said I was fine, he sent the person away. He said he was going to the mountain to guard a big game and would be away for many days. He asked my mother to bake a lot of cakes for him to take. When my mother was kneading the dough, she added lard and brown sugar. The cakes were baked fragrant. She also made thick cotton insoles and a cotton hat for him. Zhang the hunter took the cakes, looked at the insoles and hat, raised his head to look at her, and his eyes became much softer. "It's going to be the new year. After I sell this big game, you'll go buy New Year's goods. What do you want to buy?" My mother held my hand and stood at the door to see him off, looking at his limping back. "Come back early." Zhang the hunter paused for a moment, but didn't turn his head. He just waved at us. "Go back. It's cold outside." We waited for 5 days, but he still didn't come back. The weather got even colder, and it started to snow on the 5th day. My mother looked at the getting darker sky and then at me. She pointed to the food in the kitchen and told me to take care of myself and cook something to eat if I was hungry. "Mother, you'll go find him." She changed her clothes, tied the firewood knife to her body, and gave me an oil lamp. I also took a small sickle and secretly hid it on me, following her closely. "Mother, wherever you go, I go." "Well, go find Dad back." Zhang the hunter was my dad now. He was much better to me than my real father. I would only have one dad from now on. My mother said, "If something really happens to us, it will be hard for you to live alone. Forget it. Let's go together." Our mother and I held hands and went up the mountain. We only picked up firewood at the edge of the mountain and rarely went inside. There were wolves, wild boars, and tigers that ate people inside. But thinking about Zhang Dad and not knowing where he was waiting for us, I felt not afraid with my mother. The snow fell heavier and heavier. It had only been snowing for an afternoon, but the sky had already darkened. It was very difficult to walk in the forest, with deep and shallow steps. Sometimes, we would accidentally fall into pits filled with tree leaves. My mother pulled me out and used a stick to probe the road ahead. We didn't walk for long before we heard heavy footsteps in front of us. My mother held the firewood knife, and I held the sickle. We stared ahead cautiously and fearfully. If we really had to die here, at least we would die together with my mother. The sun in front got closer and closer, and soon a tall man with a limping leg appeared. He was dragging a tiger with great difficulty. We were stunned for a moment, and he was also stunned when he saw us. "Why did you two come here?" He reached out and pinched me under my armpit, as if he wanted to pick me up. But he had no strength and couldn't do it. I hugged his thigh tightly and looked up at him. Dad, we came to find you. My mother also hurried over. Master, you've been out for 5 days. And it's snowing. I was afraid something might happen to you. She didn't dare to say that she was worried. Because before, when my dad Father Zhao Yong'an went out for many days and didn't come back, my mother went to find him. Zhao Yong'an slapped my mother in the face and said, Something happened. Something happened. I'm such a big man. How could something happen to me? You're always cursing me and not wishing me well. That's why I'm so unlucky. My mother didn't dare to say anything worried about Zhao Yong'an anymore. In fact, I think she didn't care about Zhao Yong'an anymore. After all, he was really not a good husband, not a good father, or even a good person. But Dad looked at my mother, twitched the corner of his mouth, and tried to smile. Maybe he hadn't smiled for a long time and didn't know how to smile anymore. But he explained, This big guy is too big. And I came back late. He picked up the tiger again and told us to go back first. You go back and boil water and cook. You'll be back soon. Such a big tiger. He didn't know how long he had dragged it. And he was already so tired that he could hardly drag it anymore. But he didn't order us to help and wanted to drag it back by himself. My mother saw how tired he was and hesitated, not daring to disobey but also wanting to help. I ran forward and dragged the tiger's leg. Dad, let's go back together with you. I didn't have much strength. And I was a little afraid when I touched the tiger's leg. The tiger was so big. Even though it was dead, it still looked very fierce. My mother hesitated for a moment and then gathered her courage to run over. You go back quickly. Zhang the hunter's mouth twitched a few times and finally said, Okay. The 3 of us spent a lot of effort to drag the tiger home. By this time, the snow on the ground was already thick, and the whole village was pitch black, with no one on the street. Finally, when we got home, the big tiger lay in the snow, looking even more fierce. But I wasn't afraid and even circled around it a few times. Then I ran back and hugged Dad's leg. Dad is so 厉害. Even a tiger can be killed. Zhang Dad was so tired that he couldn't even move. But he still reached out and touched my head. His hands were big, rough, and heavy. But when he touched my head, they were very light and warm. Zhao Yong'an's hands were also big, but not rough because he rarely did anything. His strength was actually not big either. Every time he went out to cause trouble and was beaten by others, he would just cover his head and lie on the ground, not even daring to resist. But when he hit my mother and me, his strength was very big. And every time he hit me, my head would buzz. Many men in the village would slap their wives' and children's heads and bodies. I always thought that all fathers and husbands were like this. But I didn't expect that some people were different. The next morning, before dawn, Zhang Dad went to get a bullock cart and told us to get up and go to the county town to sell the big tiger. In the county town, he was familiar with the place and found a big family. He called someone, and a steward came out. Seeing him, the steward was very enthusiastic, and they hugged and talked happily. It turned out that Dad could be so lively and talk so much. My mother and I shrank behind, looking at the thick door panels, the high gate, and the stone lions at the entrance, feeling a little afraid and not daring to go forward. Dad pointed at us, and the steward looked at us and took out a small purse from his body. Come, child, take this. I didn't dare to take it, but he stuffed it into my hand. Dad also nodded, and then I dared to take it. Thank you. Uncle. There was small silver in the purse. I stuffed the purse into Dad's hand. Dad. The steward uncle was stunned for a moment and then laughed heartily. Good. Lao Zhang. You have a caring little cotton-padded jacket. You will be blessed in the future. He gave me another purse. This one is for your dad. And this one is for you. Keep it for yourself. The steward uncle bought the tiger and also invited Dad to drink wine. Dad waved his hand and refused. There's nothing at home. I need to buy New Year's goods. Then next time we'll drink. You must come. The tiger sold for a lot of silver. Dad took us to the street to buy things. First, we went to a wonton stall for breakfast. 1,000 miles fragrance big meat wontons. One big bowl for each person. The thin skin. The big filling. Floating in the chicken soup. Emitting an enticing fragrance. My mother was not used to eating it. But since Dad had already bought it, she couldn't waste it. She wanted to give it to me. But Dad stopped her. Children eating too much will have a stomachache again. My mother immediately remembered the time I had a stomachache from eating too much and didn't dare to give me too much. After eating the wontons, my mother's face looked much better. Dad took us to buy meat, rice, flour, oil, and some spices for cooking. Finally, we went to the cloth store to buy new quilts and new cotton-padded jackets. My mother quickly waved her hand and said, No need. The quilts and cotton-padded jackets we had before are still good. I also said, No need. When we first came, the quilts and cotton-padded jackets Dad gave us were a bit old. But they were very warm and clean. This is already very good. I had never worn such good cotton-padded jackets in my life. But Dad waved his big hand and said, We have silver now. Let's buy some new ones. In the end, we still bought them. But not the finished products. We bought cloth and cotton. I can make them. And in fact, I can make them before the new year. My mother was still reluctant to spend too much silver. She also picked out a piece of cyan cloth for Dad and compared it. Master, this piece looks good on you. The two of them were very close for the first time. I seemed to see that Dad's face turned red. When his face turned red, he seemed even happier. He picked me up and put me on his neck, so that I could see far and high. I laughed heartily. It was the first time I was so high and could see so far. My mother carefully protected us on the side and kept looking at Dad's leg, afraid that he would be tired. After a while, Dad went to buy some sesame candies and sugar figurines for me to eat. He also bought hair ropes and hair flowers for my mother and me. The aunt at the stall praised, Brother, your wife and daughter are both so beautiful. These hair flowers look the best on them. These are goods from the prefectural city. Dad and Mom both blushed. On the way back, we sat on the bullock cart. I held the sugar figurine and was reluctant to eat it. I just felt that this was probably the happiest day I had had since I was a child. On the way back, we passed by the Chao family. I saw my grandmother washing clothes with hot water in the yard. It turned out that she also knew that it was necessary to use hot water to wash clothes in winter. My second uncle was lazily sitting under the eaves, basking in the sun. My second uncle still hadn't gotten married and had nothing to do every day. He just ate, drank, and went out to fool around. They sold my mother and me for 30 taels of silver. With the money, he was even more unwilling to work, saying that he was waiting to find a girl from a good family. My grandmother always said that my mother and I were too lazy. But in fact, I didn't dare to say that my second uncle was the laziest. I held the sugar figurine and looked at it for a few more times. My grandmother and second uncle just looked over. Their eyes widened in disbelief. And then they showed a vicious expression. Loser. Slut. My grandmother's loud scolding just ended. And a stone hit my second uncle's head. He jumped up in anger. Who hit me? Dad threw another stone. And this time it hit my grandmother's basin. They were always bullying and afraid of the strong. Both of them were very angry. But they didn't dare to say a word. My mother tightly held my hand. Her eyes red. After walking far away, I looked back and could still see the resentful eyes of my second uncle and grandmother. I suddenly got the courage and waved the sugar figurine in my hand and made a face at them. I have a real dad now. They can't bully us anymore. After we got back, my mother hurried to prepare the food for the new year and the new quilts and cotton-padded jackets. Dad repaired the places that needed repairing and mended the places that needed mending at home. When he had free time, he would go to pick up firewood and never be idle. He also brought back rabbits and pheasants. But he didn't sell them. Instead, he salted them and hung them under the eaves, saying that we could eat them slowly in the future. This time I heard clearly. He said that when I ate more meat in the future, I wouldn't have a stomachache from eating too much anymore. I wanted to follow him up the mountain, but he wouldn't allow it. Kids should just play. I won't let you go. I wanted to help my mother, but he also told me to play. Your dad said to let you play. We, Dan, haven't had a good time playing before. Now we can play. I didn't know who to play with. So I just held my sugar figurine and walked on the street. The sugar figurine was very mighty. Like a general. Very much like Dad. I was reluctant to eat it. But as soon as I went out, I met a few naughty children. They came up and snatched my sugar figurine. And also scolded me as a loser. Your mother has long been having an affair with the lame man and gave birth to you. This loser. Oh. Bah. It was your grandmother who said it herself. It must be true. A slut and a loser. No wonder your father just died. And before the funeral was even held, your mother took you and remarried. I fought back desperately. No. My mother and I were driven out by grandmother. My mother is not a slut. And I am not a loser. But I was too small to beat them. My clothes were torn and dirty. The sugar figurine was gone. And even the new hair rope I bought was missing. The children who snatched my sugar figurine ran away triumphantly. I sat on the ground, crying and covered in mud. My second uncle and grandmother stood at the door, looking at me viciously. Slut! You deserve it. At that moment, I shouted at them. I am not a slut. You are. You are the ones who are vicious. You wanted to sell us. But the brothel wouldn't pay so much silver for me, a bean sprout, and my mother, who had given birth. You just wanted to keep us in the village and hope to see us beaten to death by Zhang the hunter. You didn't expect that Dad wouldn't beat us or torture us, but treat us so well. So you can't stand it and spread rumors behind our backs. They thought I was a child and didn't understand. But I had heard them talking. They were the most vicious ones. I lost the sugar figurine and hair rope that Dad bought for me and was embarrassed to go back. I hesitated near the door. Dad came down from the mountain and saw me in a dirty state, with blood on my face. He was so scared that he dropped the firewood and pheasant. Who hit you? I had never seen him so angry before and was so scared that I trembled. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. He was so flustered that he wiped the mud on my face randomly. Tell Dad who hit you. His hands were very rough, but they calmed my flustered heart. I stammered and told him what happened. The more he listened, the uglier his face became. He took me back and handed me to my mother to take care of. while he took the firewood knife and went out. Master. My mother pulled him, but he shook his head. Dad thought for a while and threw away the firewood knife. Picked up the stick used to block the door. And that day, the fathers of those naughty children were all beaten. The son doesn't teach. The father's fault. You can't teach your children well. So I'll teach you. There will be a next time. You'll break your legs. Those strong men, with good hands and feet, were chased around the village by my dad, who had a limping leg. Like chasing rabbits. Dad walked slowly but steadily and always caught up with them, hitting them with the stick one by one. Those men cried out in pain. Many people in the village came to watch. And they also went to the Zhao family and beat my second uncle severely. At that time, you insisted on selling Yong'an and Dandan to me. I gave the silver and signed the contract. If you still spread rumors behind our backs in the future, tell your second son to be careful when walking at night. My second uncle cried out in pain and quickly shouted that he would never dare again. Dad turned his head and looked at those people who were watching secretly. In the future, if you have any gossip, come to me and say it. Don't dare to say it in front of me. Everyone was so scared that they waved their hands, saying they had never said anything. Some people also said, everyone in this Zhao village knows that Yong'an and Zhao from the Zhao family. Who doesn't know their bad intentions? That's right. Look at how well Yong'an and Zhao are living now. It's Lao Dong who knows how to love them. Yong'an and Zhao are really in a blessed nest with him. Dad took the stick and came back. He looked at me and touched my head. Who gave you the name Zhao? It was given by my grandmother. Many girls are called this name. Zayadai, Bayadai, Lady, Pandi. They are all related to having a younger brother. Dad didn't like this name. He looked outside and said, from now on, you will be called Zhao. Zhao is like the sun and the moon, with a bright future ahead. I was 6 years old and finally had a proper name. Zhang Zhao. I smiled with my mother. Look, I have a proper name now. My mother wiped away her tears with a ready smile. Yes. Zhao Zhao. Zhao from now on. That night, my mother quickly made the new bedding and discussed with me. Zhao Zhao, you are older now. Starting tomorrow, you will sleep by yourself. Okay? Where will mother sleep? I thought for a moment and nodded firmly. Okay. I will sleep by myself. With that, have a little brother or sister sooner. I will take them to play. This time, I really wanted a little brother or sister. Just like Dad. And they would surely be very nice. The next day, Dad got up early in the morning and pulled me up. He told me, Zhao Zhao, Dad was very 厉害 yesterday when beating those bad guys. Right. I nodded vigorously. 厉害. Dad then patted my thin shoulder. If you want to protect yourself, you can't rely on Dad all your life. You have to rely on yourself. Does Zhao want to be as 厉害 as Dad? I nodded again. Yes. I want to be as 厉害 as Dad. To protect Mom and Dad. Protect the little brother and sister in the future. And also be able to go up the mountain to hunt tigers and earn a lot of silver. Dad was very pleased and asked me to run around the yard. 50 laps first. After running 50 laps, I was so tired that I could hardly stand. He gritted his teeth and wouldn't let me stop. Mom watched and felt distressed. But she didn't say anything. She just made more food. After running, it was time to practice horse stance and lift the stone blocks that Dad brought back. The stone blocks were very heavy. Just enough for me to lift. After practicing for a whole day, my hands and feet were covered with blisters. Mom washed my feet and picked the blisters. Zhao Zhao. Practice hard. Your dad is doing this for your good. Mom, I know. Ordinary families only let girls work. And they won't teach them these things. Dad's kindness. I understand. That night, Mom changed us into new bedding. She hugged her quilt and entered Dad's room. They talked for a few words inside before turning off the light. Although it was a bit noisy this night, I slept very soundly in the new bedding. The next day, Dad got up late. I had already run 30 laps outside. And he just got up. This day, he and Mom kept blushing and secretly looking at each other. When they were caught looking, they would quickly turn their heads and smile with red faces. Adults are really strange. After a prosperous new year, in the following year, Dad used the silver to buy some good farmland. During the busy farming season, he worked in the fields. When he was free, he would go hunting in the mountains. Dad also started to take me up the mountain, teaching me how to hunt, how to distinguish the feces and footprints of animals, and how to use a knife and bow and arrow. He also taught me how to knock people out with the least effort. My strength was still small, and my progress was not great. Our family lived a happy life. But there were still rumors in the village, mostly spread by the Zhao family, that lame man picked up a bargain and got a wife and daughter for free. That slut is so proud, even though she's with a lame man. Zhang the lame man is not as good looking as Zhao Yong'an. Zhao Yong'an was good looking but couldn't do anything. He was a farmer but was unwilling to do any work. His greatest ability was to beat his wife and children. I looked at Dad's leg again and became anxious. Dad, be careful when walking. Mom, who was nearby, slapped me on the head. Your dad treats you so well. Zhao Zhao, we can't be ungrateful. We can't be like the villagers. Looking at your dad like that, she thought I had also become a white-eyed wolf like the villagers. And she was very angry but also reluctant to hit me hard. I quickly said, No, Mom, I want to learn medicine. Maybe I can cure Dad's leg after learning. I didn't care if Dad was lame or had a scar on his face. I just felt sorry for him. He was such a strong man but had difficulty walking due to his injury. On rainy days, his leg would hurt when he walked too much. Mom knew my thoughts and was also worried. It's not easy to be an apprentice. They don't like to accept girls either. Just when Dad overheard my thoughts outside the door, he was silent for 2 days. Then he took me to the county town again and found the steward uncle of the big family to ask for his help. The uncle looked at me carefully and was very happy. Good. You'll take care of it. It's just that Zhao. Learning medicine is very hard. Even harder than being an apprentice. Can you endure the hardship? I patted my chest. I can. When I learn medicine, you'll cure Dad's leg, earn silver to support Mom and Dad, and have a little brother and sister. The uncle laughed heartily. And a little brother and sister. There's news. Dad blushed and said quickly. It's still early. I started learning medicine in the county town and could only go home once every half a month. I only asked to bring the stone blocks used for practicing at home. Mom was reluctant to let me go out alone and stood at the entrance of the medical clinic, unwilling to leave. I waved my hand. Mom, just go. It'll be filial to you when I come back. Mom smiled at me. Okay. Mom will wait. The doctor in the medical clinic was the old acquaintance of the steward uncle. He usually had a good temper with patients but was very strict with the medicine boys and apprentices in the store. We would be scolded if we were too stupid, didn't learn well, or served water to the guests late. Sometimes, we would even be beaten. Several little boys were so wrong that they went home soon and refused to come back. I wasn't afraid of this. I planned to endure whatever it took. What the doctor did was just because he hated that we couldn't learn well. When Dad saw that my progress in practicing martial arts was slow, he had the same look in his eyes. I knew that although the doctor was strict, he always made sure we had enough to eat and never treated us badly in terms of food and clothing. I still practiced martial arts according to the methods Dad taught me, lifting the 10-ton blocks every day. My strength became stronger and stronger. I was strong and learned massage from the doctor. I practiced on the doctor first. The doctor was usually very tired, and I massaged him comfortably. He also had more smiles on his face towards me. Every half a month when I went home, I would first massage Dad's broken leg. At first, he was reluctant and only allowed me to do it after some hesitation. After a while, he would have red eyes. When he got up, he could walk much more smoothly. Zhao is really smart and learns quickly. Mom asked me to teach her too. When you're not at home, Mom can also massage your dad. He's too tired. I taught them both. Zhao is not at home, and Mom and Dad can massage each other. These words made them both blush. Adults were really strange. Why would they blush over such a thing? I studied medicine and martial arts in the city for 3 years and made rapid progress. I also grew into a big girl. However, during this period, Mom still couldn't get pregnant. There were rumors in the village that Dad couldn't have children. Yong'an could give birth to Zhao, which meant she could definitely have children. Now she couldn't get pregnant. So it must be Zhang the lame man's problem. When I heard this, I was very angry and wanted to argue with them. Mom held me back. It's none of our business. Don't listen to the villagers' nonsense. Dad's body was fine, and Mom did have some underlying health issues from her time in the Zhao family. She had been conditioning her body but had no effect. Mom was very anxious, and Dad comforted her. Don't worry. Raising Zhao is already very good. Zhao is better than several troublesome sons. But just at this time, Zhao Yong'an actually came back. I saw Zhao Yong'an in the medical clinic. He was dressed like a gentleman and was walking with a young noblewoman, looking very intimate. I was shocked to see him. He also saw me but didn't recognize me. After more than 3 years, I was no longer the thin, dark beings brought in the Zhao family. Of course, he couldn't recognize me, but I could recognize him. Wasn't he dead? How could he be alive and come back like this? I quietly asked around and found out that Zhao Yong'an and that woman were husband and wife. They came to see the doctor for infertility. The woman couldn't have children and had taken many medicines but to no avail. Knowing that our doctor's medical skills were good, they came from a long way. When they went out, Zhao Yong'an carefully held the woman's hand, as if serving an ancestor. When my mother couldn't give birth to a son, he was not like this. I was so distracted at night when boiling medicine that I almost burned the patient's medicine. I was beaten on the hand by the doctor. I think you're getting more and more backward. Zhao, do you still want to learn? I covered my hand and said, Sir, I just can't figure it out. A person died on the battlefield but came back. What would happen? The doctor was stunned for a moment and sneered. Then he is a deserter. If caught, he would be beheaded. I asked for leave from the doctor and wanted to go back to sea. The doctor looked at me deeply and approved my leave. When I got back, I told my parents about this. Dad looked at Mom, and Mom said indifferently, the Zhao family's affairs have nothing to do with us. Zhao, don't worry about it. Dad was very happy with Mom's attitude and held her hand tightly. Yes, it has nothing to do with us. Zhao. Don't care. Okay. I just came back to report the news. I just happened to have a vacation and wanted to stay at home for 2 more days before going back. But that night, Zhao Yong'an came to our house secretly. He came with a small box. Here are 20 taels of silver. Consider it as repaying you for buying Yong'an back then. As long as you let Yong'an give birth to a son for me and raise him for a few years, it will be fine. My parents and I were shocked to see him. I really wanted to ask if he was crazy, but he said it as if it was a matter of course. My current wife can't have children. I always need to find someone else to have a child. Yong'an gave birth to a daughter for me before. This time, she will definitely be able to give birth to a son. And you, Zhang the lame man, you can't have children either. Yong'an gives birth to a son, and you can say it's yours.